Okay, fine. So yesterday we were talking about servlet collaboration, right? So we have seen three different things: request dispatches and redirect, and using some logic in order to move from one resource or one servlet to some other resource. Like it can be an HTML, we have seen HTML, or we have seen from one servlet to another servlet, right? Using either a forward method or an include method, right? So the basic reason behind forward is that we are actually moving completely into the next resource, and whatever we do in a current servlet will not be applied. But include is something, whatever action you are doing or whatever you want to show in a servlet, even that will be printed on page, and also the other resource will be painted or included on the same servlet page. Right? So that is what happens with these two. Right now. Let's move on to the next topic, which is servlet configs. Right now, here in our project, right, whenever we create any servlet, right, in our web.xml, a separate servlet context will be created. A servlet web config will be created separately. You can see here that you have got many servlets. We have created many servlets. For each and every servlet, you have a separate, servlet tag and servlet mapping. You have got separate things for everything. So let me just separate them out. Yeah. So yeah. Now you can see we have created so many servlets in these classes, previous classes. You can see here. So for each and every servlet, whenever you create, right, it will create a separate config for you. Now there is some significance of this configuration, which is, so whenever you create a new project with the configuration module of 2.5, right, then only this configuration will be created. Now where do we actually opt that is, so whenever you go for any creation of dynamic web project, right? So here you can see there is nothing but your web module version. Okay. So if you select the 3.0 version, right? So this auto, include will not happen. But yes, if it is this main significance of the servlet mapping here, where you can see the servlet and the servlet mapping is to mention this URL pattern. This URL pattern is nothing but the one which we always used to browse on. See, till yesterday we have seen that whenever we used to browse a servlet, we used to give slash and the servlet name. So that is called as a URL pattern we are mentioning here, right? Now in our web model version 3.0, you don't have to do that, right? It will be directly added to your servlet. But yes, that is something which is being done auto. Right, let us learn something which we have to do physically, which is in 2.5 version. If you select this, right, so it will allow the Eclipse to create the servlet context tags in the web.xml, right? And whenever you deploy this project into Tomcat, right, Tomcat will understand that okay, this servlet is something which I've got the name, the name and the mapping of the servlet. Right? That's our main difference. Now in this servlet, the main tags are this. You don't need this. Okay, description is something whenever you want to get description, you can mention here, and display is something where you will be displaying in a URL, right? It will display with this name, right? Basically, if you are writing manually, you will write only this part, which is you will be having a name of a servlet, right? So basically, we maintain the name of the servlet same as class name, but you can give any name here, right? The name of a servlet is something which is used as a key between this servlet tag and servlet mapping tag, right? Now in this tag of servlet, the name is tagged to corresponding class. Now you can see here the class name which we have created is my first serve was a servlet, right? So we are tagging that with some name called my first serve, the same name. Now where it is used is when you go to servlet mapping, right? Now you can see servlet name. There is one more tag called servlet name. Both are same here. This servlet name and this servlet name. Now we mentioned that the servlet name is same, and URL pattern is this, which means whenever anyone tries to access this servlet, internally it will go to this name. This name of servlet is here, and it in turn will go to this class, which means this class will be executed and the response will be routed. That is what is the significance of this servlet and servlet mapping. Right? This config tags are created for each and every servlet. Even if you create any servlet as such, right, it will create. Now, let us create one servlet and we'll see if it is created. Let me create something called new servlet. Let me call it as source config something. Oops. Source config as a class name and just say finish. Now you can see here it will be, so your source config will be created, which is at the end. It will create your where it creates, but it creates it. This is something which is your servlet configuration which you have. Now in this configuration, so the auto things are something which you won't have to worry about. Is once you define your name and the corresponding class and the name and the corresponding mapping URL pattern, this will take care of everything for browsing. Now there is something which you have to learn in here is the first topic is servlet configs. Right? Servlet configs is something we basically use servlets, configuration, right, as a common files, right, where you will mention different details like maybe some common details, right, like path of file or database name, database username, database password, right. So these are something which you want to mention in some file and use across all the web applications. That is how we use some configuration files normally, right, in our real time. The same here, we will be using this servlet tags in order to mention some common configuration steps. Let us say we want to mention the servlet, the database name and right and the location of database. Let us say we just want to mention two things. Now we can also hard code that in a servlet, and also we can mention in web.xml. What is the difference? The main difference is if you change anything in your servlet, right, you have to recompile the servlet, or you have to recompile the whole project, and you have to redeploy everything on Tomcat again. That is what happens when you actually touch your .java classes. But if you change something on web.xml, right, it will not change anything, because web.xml is something which doesn't need compilation. It is a raw file, right? It is a raw file being read by all your classes or all your JSPs and all. Now keep this in mind. This is something which is going to be this configuration concept is something which will drive all your struts and strings, right? Because all your web.xmls or .xml files are something which are complete raw files. It is like whatever you write on board, it will stay as it is. You don't have to compile or do anything. Those raw content will be accessed by your compiled classes. That's why instead of hard coding in our servlets or any classes, right, we go for something called configuration files, where you mention some common things like maybe database name, right, or file name. So there will be so many things across your project you will be using where you want some name or some details, right, you will be mentioning that over here. That is what is a significance of using your configuration files. But here the configuration file is our web.xml is our configuration file, right? Now, so here you don't have to, so if you want to get the configuration items in a servlet class, right, you don't have to actually read this XML, read line by line and read it. No. So our web container, which is also called a servlet container provided by any web server, right, like Tomcat and all, what they'll do is a web container have got capability of creating some objects of your configuration and provide that directly to a servlet. We will see what are they, right? and you can actually use that object directly to get the information of whatever servlet you want. Now here, this servlet, which is servlet source config, right, will get all the information provided in between this servlet tag only, right? Yes, there are other things. If you mention outside the servlet tags, you can also get that. We'll see later. But as of now, what we are checking is we are checking only the servlet config, this tag, servlet config. So whatever you mention here inside this, how to actually access them is using your servlet config tag. We'll see how we can use, right? So that is main advantage, that you don't have to modify your servlet, but you can directly modify your routers. Right? Now let us see how we can actually do that. Now inside this, you have something called, now if you want to define all your database names and all, right, which means you want to define your own configurations, right? So we'll be defining those configuration files, configuration details inside your servlet tag. Because why I'm doing only here is because currently I'm going to work on my source config. That's why I've taken this servlet and I'll be mentioning my own configurations here. Now you have a servlet internal tag called init param. So this init param is something where you can mention your parameter value. Now here, one init param is for one configuration setting. Let me just take, so here inside you have something called parameter name, let us say db name, and you have something called parameter value. Let us say your db name is something jdbc dot maybe some xyz.com, let us say something db name. This is one configuration item, right? If you want to go to other configuration item, you cannot mention one more names and all here, right? So you will be creating one more init param. You can create any number of init params inside a servlet tag. I can create one more init param here. Now in this, I'll give one more param name. Let us say it is username of the database, right? And then you have something called parameter value. Let us say the username is some super, right? Something, right? So this is something which we have mentioned some configuration items inside my servlet tag, which is init param, right? And maybe some init params over here, and init param, one more init param item, a db name and the user of that db. Now let's go to the servlet and see how we can actually access these things from our servlet. Now here, I want to, let me just close everything here. I want to run this server directly. I want to read my configurations and I want to paint it here. That is what is the context here. Now let us take try catch here. Let's just say it's just error. So even in servlets, right, try to maintain this app logger over here, right? So whatever you have learned in our core Java, right? File logging, right? So we will be using the same file logging context, right? Even in our web application asset, right? So always try to use as possible as try catch, and always try to log the exceptions or even the steps, right? All the steps. Create two type of logging. We have already seen that one is information logging and another is error logging, right? In each and every step, just say I'm at servlet config. Right, just say what you're doing. You're going to call a servlet, call a config. Each and every step, try to log it. That's the best way of coding some application, right? Because that application will not be only used by you, right? So after you, maybe some other people will be maintaining this application. So at that time, they should not feel that the application is complex. So your config files will help you a lot in debugging the actual error, right? So it will be very helpful when you deploy the same project in your client location, right? So you can have an easy look over the actual sensitive area where your web application is either getting killed or something, right? So always try to use some loggers, at least two type of logs. One is error log and another is information or some, we call it as runtime logs, right? So just try to do that, right? Because we just have to create a separate logger file and use that class here. That's it, right? Just there is no harm in doing that. Now here, so we have some token called servlet config, right? So this servlet config is an object or a class which is provided by a servlet Java servlet package, right? So this is a object I was talking about. Our servlet or web container will actually create a servlet config for us, because pertaining to this config there will be one servlet config, right? So we will be catching that config into this object, into this, which is equal to, we have a direct method in servlet called get servlet config. We'll also see servlet context. The first thing that we are checking out is servlet config. Now with this, what it will expose is all the web.xml whatever is mentioned in this servlet tag or the same name, or this class whatever, wherever it is exposed, right? So those configurations will be exposed to this conf. That's what happens. Now from here, using this conf, you can actually get the details. Let us say I want to get my DB name, let us say, right? DB name. Now how you can get this? There are some internal methods. The first method is you have obj dot get init param. So this init param is nothing but you are actually trying to get some initialized parameter which is defined in this context of your servlet. Now you have to give the key here. Now the key should be your name. Your name is key and your value is a value. Your name is key and your value is a value. That's all. Just copy this up, go back here and paste it. Now this will directly get you the DB name which is defined in the init parameter of the corresponding or the current servlet. Then you may define the same init param in some other servlet too. This is my one more servlet, let us say, right? I can also mention the same name, maybe I am giving them some ODBC. Right? But this init param is corresponding to some other class which is page one server. So this will never be exposed. That's very important, right? Now here we will be getting the init param pertaining to our servlet or our servlet config. Right? Now with this we will be getting the DB name. Let's print it out. Let us say response dot set content type of my text text or HTML here, and then you want a print writer. Let me take this out is equal to my response dot get writer. Now with this you have got the accessibility to write something on page. What we'll do, we'll just say out dot print or write println of, let's say my DB name. We have something called DB. Okay. We're just printing this DB name. Right? Now let me run this. So what we'll do, we'll go to page 1 maybe. We'll run it from page. We'll see how it runs from page, right? Instead of running directly, let me use the servlet name in my page 1. Right. So let me save this. So serve config. Now here let me show you something else now. I will not run from here. So today I will not run from this web.xml. Instead what I will do is, so I will rebuild this theme and rebuild, right? So you can see here whenever we rebuild it will be published, right? And what I'll do, I'll just start the Tomcat here. You can either use this option or just right click and just say start, right? So whenever I start my web application, Tomcat, it will start the Tomcat and it will make sure that my application is deployed. Now whenever I compile this project, right? Right? So it will be, so if there is any change, it will be synchronized automatically. Now let's go to the browser. So now we are going to directly, call that. That is a local host. Right? We already have it. Everywhere. Now you can see I directly got my page here because I'm not running anything from here. But even if you run here, which means what it does is it will actually deploy our project and open up our project in an Eclipse-based browser. But what we are doing is we directly run this up and we are showing it on a page. That's fine. So here, when I click on my submit button, right? So it will go to the form. It will see which action. Now we are giving the action as a config. It is not configs. What is the class name? Class name is servlet config, right? Servlet config. Okay. Now you can see whenever I say it says republish, right? So even if it is republished, right, you are actually changing something. Just restart it. There is no harm in it, right? Go back and just say enter again, and you will get this. Now here, whenever you click on submit, it will go to the service config. So it will come to this service config. As we are not mentioning any method here, right? It will go to doGet method here. So in doGet, what we are doing, we are trying to get some configuration. Let's do that. Click on go. Now you can see here, it says my DB name is jdbc.xyz.com, which we have mentioned. We haven't used that JDBC here. Instead, we are working with servlet config, right? Getting the pertaining servlet config, whatever we want from here, which is the one we know the DB name is there. That's why we are getting it out and we are using that as a DB, right? This is how we use the servlet config to get the configuration files, right? So this is something which we have seen, right? Now here, if you know the key, right, you can get the value. Now if you want to get all the pertaining parameters, we also have that option. Let us say I want to define one more unit param. Let us say I want to give some password of this. Let us say param name. Let us say DB password. Right? So here let me just say super and admin. Admin is a password, let us say. Right? So now you have three different parameters. Now let us see how you can actually get all the parameters irrespective of the key and value. Right? Let's see that. So after this, let me create an out dot print, or rather I'll just say print element of mine. Just break it up and just say all config details. Now here we'll try to get all the configs. Now again, getting all the configs is something which is we are going to use again the same servlet config again. Right? We are not going to get it from somewhere else, but it will be you'll be using same thing. So inside this config object, you have one internal method called get init parameter names. So this is what we have. This parameter names method will give you the enumeration type. Right? Enumeration, which you have seen something called enum, right? So let us catch hold of that. We have something called enumeration, which is util package one. Let us say, as this is giving all the keys in the form of string, we'll take the string enumeration. And let us call it as enum is equal to this. Now, so all the parameters will be loaded into this enum. Now, the thing is, we have to read this enum and get each and every value. Now, how to read this? Again, if you remember, our enumeration is nothing but a cursor type. We have understood these enums under our cursors topic, right? Because enums, our iterator, or list iterator, all these things are your cursors. Cursors are nothing but whatever values you are getting being loaded, right? The pointer will be at the first before first, right? And then when you say next, what happens, or next element, what happens, it will go to the second top and it will return the first one. That is what it happened. Now we will be reading even this in the same way, right? So so we will create something called while we have something called lobj enum dot, we have something called has more elements. This has more elements will give you whether it has got elements or not. So until this is true, we will be learning this value. And let me take string lstr key maybe is equal to, now we are going to read this item which is lobj enum dot, again next element, right? Your next element, sorry, dot, the next element will give you the next item. So if it is iterating, it will give you each and every key of this, right? Now after this, what you have to do is, now I want to get the value here. Let us say I want to get the value. Now how can I get a value again? I have to use a config dot get init parameter again. Now this init parameter needs some key. Now we already have a key, right? Just use the key here. Now with this you have got a key and a value of our configuration. Now let me print it out dot println. So we'll just print it as key as lstr key, and then we have something called value. So that, right? Now that is what we have something called key. I will be printing the key over here and value. So the next time we will give you this. So until it ends here, perfect. Now this will give you the complete stuff, right? Now after that we'll just say something called retrieving config details. Something retrieving config details. Okay, just do this. Perfect. So now let's go back and then let us restart this Tomcat. So always restart this Tomcat and let's go back to my here, which is, now you can see here, before going to that, right, you can see this one, right? This is something which is called as a solid URL pattern. I said it will be your slash and your servlet name, right? That is a URL pattern which we used to mention as servlet, right? Perfect. Let me go to page 1. Now when I click on go, now you can see here, oops, okay, let us print out of println dot, let us say some break here so that it will show in good manner, right? The value on break. Perfect. Let me just restart this content. Anyways, you don't have to always restart, but yes, it's always better. During the things, during the class, I always restart. But in real time, you don't have to restart because your Eclipse will take care of that, right? If it doesn't work as required, then you can restart that. Right now you can see you have a beginning, you have directory, you have all config details, you have username, db password, and db name. Right? You have got everything you want in the directory. So this is how, right, you can actually get the things in line. If you want to read all the things, you can read. If you want to read one of them, you can read either of them. Right? So this is what is the way you can actually view the configuration files, and this is what is the way where you can actually do or mention all your configurations inside this servlet. Again guys, you will never be able to read the configuration which is being mentioned in some other servlet. Now you can see here I have got one more init param here. Let me mention one more item here. Let me just say this is something called location, right? Let me just mention this location as some local, let us say google.com, something. Right? Now this init param is pertaining to the servlet called page 1 serve, these two. So these two can be accessed only from this servlet, right? And this has nothing to do with our servlet, right? Let me restart and show you. if you don't go, here, now you can see it gets only the details which are pertaining to us. Right? So that is how we actually go for this is what is a complete configuration thing of servlets, right? Now this is something which you have seen pertaining to one servlet, right? So this is same for all the type of servlets, right? And this will be same for even your JSPs, right? So we'll see at the JSPs part. So these things are very important, guys, because this configuration. Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah. Can you go to the value which you have given and which is not appearing in the other one? Is it like somewhere you have given Google or something?
Yeah. So here I have given some of this. Here.
So okay, so if there are like multiple servlets, we can give the config parameters for all of them in the same web.xml.
Yeah, you can keep because all your servlet XMLs are created on the same web.xml, right? Whatever servlet you create, this web.xml will be a single configuration file for the whole website. Okay. Now here, even if you create multiple servlets, each and every tag will be created. And if you want anything pertaining to one servlet, right? I mean, for each and every servlet, if you want a separate config, you can mention inside that servlet tag. So that will be exposed to only that servlet. Yeah.
Okay, so for each servlet that we are giving separate parameters, that will be in separate servlet like tag or whatever.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Separate tag. Perfect. Okay. You also have one thing which you can actually get, give across the servlets. We'll come to that in our next topic. Right? Any more doubts here? Right? Is it okay now? Yami, you understood this part, right? Okay, perfect. Now that is what is something which I wanted to convey, which is configs. Now the question is, have you understood the web.xml? There are two things which you have to understand basically. The first thing is the main thing, which is welcome file list. This is something which will be added by default whenever you create a web project. And the second item what you have to understand is whenever you create any servlet. I'm talking about only servlet, guys. Don't think about any JSP or anything. Whenever you create any servlet, corresponding servlet tag will be created in your web.xml. That's the second thing which you have to know. The third thing is, so in each and every servlet, if you want to mention any configuration, you can mention in your init param. One init param is used to define one parameter. If you want to define one more parameter, you have to go for one more init param. So these are the three steps you have to understand as of now. Is that clear, guys, for all? Fine. Okay, if you have any doubts, you can just ask me now, because this is something which you have to understand. Until you understand servlets, right? It will be very difficult for you to understand JSPs. Again, it will be very difficult to understand the frameworks, guys. Frameworks, again, you will be getting back to servlets, because it is completely, frameworks and all are completely driven by controllers, and web.xmls or some XMLs are something which will completely drive your frameworks. Basically, it's maybe structs and strings, but you should have a very good grip on servlet. That's why I'm just pressing on each and every concept of the servlet, whatever is needed. Fine. Is that clear? Fine then. So if it is clear, then let's move on to the next one, which is something called servlet context. Now this servlet context is again something which is pertaining to the configuration. Again, we'll be touching upon for servlet context. This servlet context is used for many things, not just to read the parameter things. It is used for many things. So as we move on, we'll understand how we will be using context. But as of now, let us see how we can actually use this. So what exactly is servlet context and how we can actually get the details from web.xml. That is very important now, right? Now, so again the servlet context is same thing, which is this is an object again created by web container, but this is created by web container while deploying the project itself, right? Now deploying the project is nothing but, now here, now how did we deploy here? So if you go, you can see here, let me just remove this part again and I'll show you the deployment. You should not get confused with the term called deploy, right? Now how do we deploy in our Eclipse is, if you have multiple projects and if you have configured the Tomcat, right? Now as of now there are no projects inside this Tomcat deploy, right? You can see it as empty. Now you can just right click on that and you have something called add and remove. This is not this simple when you actually deploy in your actual server. I'll also show you how to deploy that, how to create the package of this web project and deploy. I'll show you that, don't worry, right? Now here you can see all the available projects you have. Click on that and add. So you are actually moving from available to configured, right? Now if you can see here, you have an option called if server is started, publish changes immediately. That's why whenever we rebuild and restart this project, right, what happens, it will delete the old files and it will get all the new class files and web.xml files and it will deploy into this project. That's what it is. Always try to keep it open, keep it checked and finish. Now you can see that servlet is deployed in this and you can see it is trying to be published. When you start this, right, start the server, now it will start the server and it will keep this published. Now that is what is called as deploy. Whenever I say deployed, which means we are actually getting the contents of our project and copying the whole thing into Tomcat. That is, we can say in that way, right? So the way of this complete process is called as a website deployment, right? Now during the deployment and starting up of a Tomcat, this servlet context object will be created. And keep in mind, this servlet context is the only one for the complete web application. Now when we were talking about servlet configs, right, we said for each and every servlet there will be a separate config object will be created. Why? Because for each and every servlet we can actually mention its own configuration parameters. That's why for each and every servlet you can have different servlet configs. But here servlet context will be only one for all the servlets. Right? There won't be, if you have 10 different servlets, there won't be 10 different contexts. There will be only one context. And this context is being created by your container, which is web container. Right? And this will happen while either it may be while deploying or whenever you are starting your Tomcat. Whenever I'm saying Tomcat, as we are learning Tomcat, that's why I'm saying Tomcat. It can be a WebSphere, a WebLogic, anything, because each and every web server will provide some web container so that your servlet can run on it, right? So that is what happens here. It will start. Now here again the basic advantage of using this servlet context is here is whenever there is any change, right, you don't have to change your servlet files. You can directly change your web.xml because we will be looking into this context what exactly it is, right? So web.xml is something which is like a raw file. You don't have to compile or redeploy. You can directly go and change your web.xml in your Tomcat. Right? That will work. You don't have to recompile servlet, take the class file, redeploy it. You don't have to do that. The same thing applies here also, as we have seen in our servlet configs. Right? Now let us see how actually we can actually access this servlet context and how can we define the configs in our servlet. Now again guys, keep in mind servlet context is something which is common for all servlets. If you are mentioning anything in this configuration, which means whenever you are changing anything here, which means it is going to affect all the servlets wherever you are going to use these parameters. That is something which is very important. And again, if you want to provide some information common to all configurations, then you can go for defining your context parameters, right? Otherwise, you can go for your servlet configs. Either of them you will be using mostly in your real time, right? Now, let's go back here and see how we can define. Now this we will be defining, as I said, this is something which is common to all servlets, right? We won't be defining this inside any of the servlet tags, right? We will be defining out of all the servlet tags, but inside your web app. So this web app is something which is a root tag, right? You can see here, web app is your root tag. Now let me define maybe here, out of all the tags. Now if you just say here, you will be getting something called context param. So this context param is something which I was talking about. Now your web.xml in your Eclipse, right, is smart enough to show you what tags you can actually have. Now here you can see inside the servlet, right, if I go and just say angle bracket, it will give you whatever you can define inside the servlet tag. It will give you everything. You don't have to remember these things, right? Right. If you go inside your init param, let me just show you that. If you go to your init params here and just, you can see here it will give you three things. Either description param, right? So Eclipse will help you with that. You don't have to worry about it. So you just have to make sure whether you are actually writing the right tag or not. That's it. So here in our context param, it is same as our init param which we are defining inside the servlet. That context param is something which we are defining outside everything but inside your web app root, right? So inside this I can mention my, you can see again it's same thing, which is param name. Let us say I'm making it as db instance. I'll take it as a new name instance, and let us give some name, value as something like sun dot jdbc dot otbc driver. I'm just giving some name, right? So this is something where I have mentioned one context. What is happening here? Context param is content relation. One of the description. So it is already there, right? It is already there. And why it is not saying? Okay, let me save this. Okay, fine. Understood. We have already mentioned this. Don't worry about these things, Java, W and all, because this will be added. So that's why whenever you are creating project, right, always try to check on your web.xml creation so that this will be created directly, right? No issues. And here you have context param, and then you have something called your parameter name, which is db instance and your servlet. Now let us go to the same servlet which we have in servlet configs, or you can create one more servlet. Let me create a new servlet here. So let me call it as some context servlet. Right. Maybe context servlet 1. We'll just take this as 1 first, right? Because I want to show you that this context param can be used across all the servlets, right? That is what is my intention here. Now let's go back to the duplicate part here. Let's say try catch, right? Now there is much to learn here. Now in this context param, right? Fine then. So let's stop in here, because if I start, it will take at least half an hour more, because context param is something which is heavy again. We have to see the same thing whatever we have seen in our config, but there are so many other things which we have to learn here, right? So let us wind up here. Let us meet tomorrow, right? And then we'll see, we'll extend this context param part, how we can actually use in our servlet. Right? Fine then guys, so you guys have any doubt here? Right? Okay, if not, okay, fine then.